It was Thursday night, and Alex was doing what he always did these days, sitting alone in his apartment staring at his laptop screen. 3 months had passed since his life changed completely. 3 months since he found himself living in this small place, eating dinner by himself and trying to figure out what came next. The apartment wasn't much to look at. A tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch and coffee table, and a bedroom that felt more like a closet. But it was his, and after everything that happened, having his own space felt important. The walls were still mostly empty. He hadn't gotten around to hanging pictures or making it feel like home. Maybe he wasn't ready for that yet. Alex had been working late again. His laptop was open on the coffee table, emails scattered across the screen like digital reminders of all the things he needed to do tomorrow. Next to it sat a half-empty container of Chinese food, lo mein that had gone cold an hour ago. He kept meaning to eat it, but somehow kept forgetting. These days, he forgot to do a lot of things. The TV was on in the background, some late-night talk show that he wasn't really watching. The host was interviewing someone he didn't recognize, about a movie he'd never heard of. It was just noise to fill the silence. Alex had gotten used to having background noise. The quiet felt too heavy sometimes. Outside, rain was starting to fall. He could hear it tapping against the windows, getting heavier as the minutes passed. The weather had been strange all week. Warm during the day, then sudden storms at night. It matched how he'd been feeling lately. Everything seemed unpredictable. Alex stretched and looked at the clock on his phone. Almost 11. He should probably close the laptop and try to sleep, even though he knew he'd just lie in bed thinking for another hour. That's how most nights went now. But before he could move, he heard something that made him freeze. A soft knock at the door. Alex stared at the door like it might explain itself. Nobody knocked on his door at 11 at night. His neighbors barely acknowledged him in the hallway, and his friends knew he went to bed early these days. Maybe someone had the wrong apartment. It happened sometimes in buildings like this, where all the doors looked the same. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Definitely meant for him. He got up slowly, running his hand through his hair. He was wearing old sweatpants and a t-shirt with a hole near the collar, not exactly prepared for visitors. But whoever was out there had chosen to show up at 11 on a Thursday night, so they'd have to take what they got. Alex looked through the peephole and felt his heart skip. Standing in the hallway, looking nothing like he expected, was Zoe. Zoe, who he'd known for 3 years but had barely spoken to in the last 6 months. Zoe, who used to be part of his old life back when everything was different. Zoe, who was now standing outside his door in the rain, looking like she'd been through something difficult. Her dark hair was wet and sticking to her face. Her jacket looked soaked through. She was holding a small purse against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. Even through the tiny peephole, Alex could see that her makeup was smudged around her eyes. She looked tired and uncertain, but also determined in a way that made his stomach flutter. Alex had always noticed Zoe. How could he not? She had this way of lighting up a room when she walked in, this laugh that made everyone else want to laugh too. But she'd been off limits for so long that he'd trained himself not to think about her that way. She was part of his old friend group, part of a life that felt complicated and messy. Getting involved with her would have made everything even more complicated, but now she was here at his door at 11 at night looking like she needed somewhere to go. Alex unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Up close, he could see that she was shivering slightly. The rain had soaked through her jacket and probably her clothes underneath. Her eyes met his, and there was something in them he'd never seen before, something vulnerable and honest that made him forget about the late hour and the strange situation. "Hey," she said quietly. Her voice sounded different than usual, smaller somehow. "Hey," Alex replied, still trying to process what was happening. "Are you okay? You're soaked." Zoe looked down at herself like she'd just realized how wet she was. "Yeah, I got caught in the rain." She looked back up at him. "Can I come in? I know it's late and I should have called first, but I was in the neighborhood and..." She trailed off like she couldn't find the right words to explain why she was really there. Alex stepped back without hesitation. Of course. Come in, please. He watched her walk past him into the small living room, leaving wet footprints on the floor. She stood near the couch, looking around like she was seeing the place for the first time. I'll get you a towel, Alex said, already, heading toward the bathroom. His mind was racing with questions, but first things first, she needed to get warm and dry. When he came back with the biggest, fluffiest towel he could find, Zoe was still standing in the same spot, dripping onto his floor. She looked lost in thought, like she was having some kind of internal conversation with herself. Here, Alex said, holding out the towel. When she took it, their fingers brushed for just a second, and he felt that familiar spark he'd been ignoring for years. Thank you, Zoe said, wrapping the towel around her shoulders. She looked around the apartment again. This place is nice, cozy. Alex almost laughed. The apartment was many things, but cozy wasn't one of them. It's small, he said, but it works for now. There was an awkward pause. Do you want some tea, coffee? I think I have hot chocolate somewhere. Tea sounds perfect, Zoe said, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled a little. It wasn't her usual bright smile, but it was something. As Alex moved around the kitchen, filling the kettle and searching for tea bags, he kept glancing over at her. She'd sat down on his couch, still wrapped in the towel, staring at the TV without really watching it. There was something different about her tonight. The confidence she usually carried seemed muted, replaced by something more uncertain. The kettle started whistling, and Alex poured hot water into 2 mismatched mugs. He'd never been much of a host, especially not in this place. Everything here was temporary, including him. So, Alex said, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch and handing her a mug. Not that I'm not happy to see you, but what brings you here at 11 on a Thursday night? Zoe wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb all its warmth. She was quiet for a long moment, and Alex could see her choosing her words carefully. I had a fight with Jake tonight, she said finally. Jake, her boyfriend of the last 8 months. The guy who worked in finance and wore expensive suits and always seemed to have an opinion about everything. Alex had met him a few times at group gatherings. He seemed fine, if a little boring. A big fight? Alex asked. Zoe nodded slowly. The kind where you realize you've been lying to yourself about a lot of things. She looked up at Alex, and there was something raw in her expression. The kind where you realize you've been settling for something that feels safe instead of something that feels real. Alex felt his heart start beating faster. He wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but something told him it was going to change everything between them. The rain continued pattering against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound around his small apartment. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full of possibility. Alex watched Zoe sip her tea, noticing how she held the mug with both hands like she was trying to steady herself. The towel had slipped a little from her shoulders, and he could see that her shirt was still damp. She looked smaller than usual, more fragile, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was working up the courage to say something important. You want to talk about it? Alex asked gently. He didn't want to push, but he could tell she needed to get something off her chest. The fight with Jake was just the beginning of whatever had brought her here. Zoe set her mug down on the coffee table and pulled the towel tighter around herself. We've been together 8 months, she said, staring at the steam rising from her tea. 8 months, and I realized tonight that I don't think I've ever been completely honest with him, or with myself. Alex leaned back against the couch, giving her space to talk. He'd always been a good listener, but tonight felt different. Tonight, every word she said seemed to matter more than usual. He's a good guy, Zoe continued. Jake, I mean. He's stable, reliable, successful. All the things I thought I wanted. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. My mom loves him. My friends think I'm lucky. On paper, he's perfect. But, Alex prompted softly, but I realized tonight that I've been going through the motions, like I'm playing a role in someone else's idea of what my life should look like. Zoe pulled her knees up onto the couch, making herself smaller. We went to dinner at this fancy place downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters who refill your water glass before you even notice it's empty. Alex nodded, picturing the scene. Jake seemed like the type who'd choose restaurants based on their reputation rather than their food. He was telling me about his promotion, how he's going to make partner at his firm by 30, how we could start looking at houses in the suburbs. Zoe's voice got quieter, and I just sat there, nodding and smiling, feeling like I was watching my life happen to someone else. The rain outside was getting heavier, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. Alex's small apartment felt like a safe haven from the storm, a place where honest conversations could happen. Then he started talking about our future, Zoe said. Marriage, kids, the whole timeline laid out like a business plan, and I realized I couldn't picture any of it. Not really. I could see the house and the wedding photos and all the external stuff, but I couldn't see myself actually being happy. Alex felt his heartache for her. He'd been in similar situations before, going along with what seemed right instead of following what felt right. It was exhausting, living someone else's version of your life. So what happened? Alex asked. Zoe was quiet for a moment, picking at the edge of the towel. He asked me if I was excited about everything, about our plans, and instead of lying again, I told him the truth. I said I wasn't sure if this was what I really wanted. How did he take it? Not well. Zoe's laugh was bitter. He got this look on his face like I'd just told him his dog died. He couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful for all the security he was offering me. He kept asking what more I could possibly want. Alex could imagine Jake's confusion. From the outside, their relationship probably looked perfect. Stable job, nice guy, clear future. But Alex understood that sometimes the things that looked perfect on paper felt empty in real life. I tried to explain that it wasn't about wanting more, Zoe said. It was about wanting something different, something real. But he just kept talking about all the practical reasons why we made sense together, like love was a math equation he could solve. Alex watched her face as she talked, even upset and confused. She was beautiful. But more than that, she was real, in a way that made his chest tight. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be around someone who was willing to be genuinely vulnerable. We ended up fighting in the parking lot outside the restaurant, Zoe continued. He accused me of being unrealistic, said I was throwing away something good because I was chasing some fairy tale idea of romance. And maybe he's right. Maybe I am being unrealistic. Or maybe you're being honest about what you need, Alex said quietly. That's not the same thing as being unrealistic. Zoe looked up at him, and their eyes met for the first time since she'd started talking. There was something there, some recognition that passed between them. Alex felt like she was seeing him, really seeing him, in a way that no one had in months. I keep thinking about this thing my grandmother used to say, Zoe said. She'd tell me that you know you're with the right person when being with them feels like coming home to yourself. Not coming home to a house or a routine, but to who you really are. Alex nodded. His own grandmother had said something similar once, though he'd been too young to understand what she meant at the time. With Jake, I always felt like I had to be a slightly different version of myself, Zoe said. More polished, more conventional. Like the real me wasn't quite good enough for the life he was offering. That sounds exhausting, Alex said. It was. I didn't even realize how exhausting until tonight. Zoe picked up her mug again, wrapping her fingers around it. After we fought, I just started driving. I didn't have anywhere specific to go. I just needed to be somewhere that felt safe. Alex felt something warm spread through his chest. She'd chosen to come here, to his small, imperfect apartment, when she needed somewhere safe. That had to mean something. I ended up parked outside your building for 20 minutes before I got the courage to come up, Zoe admitted. I kept thinking about how we used to talk at parties and gatherings. How you always listened like what I was saying actually mattered. How I never felt like I had to perform around you. Alex remembered those conversations too. Late nights at mutual friends' houses, sitting on back porches or in quiet corners, talking about books and movies and dreams they were afraid to say out loud. He'd always looked forward to seeing her, even when he tried to convince himself it was just friendship. "I've missed that," Alex said honestly. "I've missed you." Zoe smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "I've missed you too, more than I let myself admit." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing what had just been said. The rain continued outside, but inside Alex's apartment something was shifting. The careful distance they'd maintained for years was starting to collapse, and neither of them seemed interested in rebuilding it. "So what happens now?" Alex asked. Zoe set down her mug and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was uncertainty there, but also something that looked like hope. "I don't know," she said. "For the first time in months, I have no idea what happens next, and that's terrifying, but it's also the most alive I've felt in a long time." Alex understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes the scariest moments were also the most honest ones. Zoe stood up from the couch, still wrapped in the towel, and began walking slowly around Alex's small living room. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the wooden floor as she moved, and Alex found himself watching her every step. There was something different about the way she carried herself now, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She stopped in front of his bookshelf, running her finger along the spines of his books. Most of them were paperbacks, well worn from multiple readings. Some had bookmarks sticking out where he'd left off. Others had notes written in the margins in his careful handwriting. "I remember this one," Zoe said, pulling out a thin volume of poetry. "You recommended it to me 2 years ago at Lisa's birthday party. We talked about it for like an hour on her back porch." Alex remembered that conversation too. They'd been sitting on the porch steps, sharing a bag of chips and talking about books while everyone else was inside playing some loud party game. It was one of those moments that had felt perfect and natural, the kind of conversation that made him forget about time entirely. "Did you ever read it?" Alex asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Zoe had always been curious about books, especially the ones that meant something to the people she cared about. "3 times, she said, opening the book to a page that was clearly familiar to her. "There's this one poem about missed chances and perfect timing that I kept coming back to. I never told you, but I thought about you every time I read it." Alex felt his heart skip. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. For 2 years she'd been thinking about him while reading something he'd shared with her. The idea made him feel dizzy. Zoe moved away from the bookshelf and walked over to look at the few pictures he'd managed to put up. Most of them were from before his life changed, back when he was part of a bigger friend group and went to parties and barbecues on weekends. She was in several of the photos, usually laughing or caught mid-conversation with someone. "Look at us," she said, touching the glass of one particular photo. It showed a group of them at a lake last summer, everyone in swimwear and sunglasses, arms around each other's shoulders. Zoe and Alex were standing next to each other, and even in the photo there was something between them. A chemistry that was obvious now, but that they'd both worked hard to ignore at the time. "I used to stare at this picture on social media," Zoe admitted. "Especially after Jake and I started dating. I'd zoom in on it and wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver back then." Alex stood up from the couch, moving closer to her. They were now standing just a few feet apart, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of rain. The towel had slipped lower on her shoulders, and he could see that her clothes underneath were still damp. "Braver how?" Alex asked, though he thought he knew what she meant. Zoe turned away from the photo to face him. Her eyes were bright and honest, more open than he'd ever seen them. "Brave enough to admit that I was attracted to you. Brave enough to tell you that our conversations meant more to me than they probably should have. Brave enough to stop pretending that what I felt was just friendship." The words hit Alex like a physical force. All those times he'd wondered if he was imagining the connection between them. All those moments when he'd talked himself out of believing she might feel the same way. It turned out he'd been right all along. "I thought I was going crazy," Alex said. "I kept telling myself I was reading too much into things, that you were just being friendly." "I was being friendly," Zoe said with a small smile, "but that's not all I was being." She took a step closer to him. I was also being careful, and scared, and convinced that acting on how I felt would ruin everything. "And now?" Alex asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Zoe was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands. When she looked back up, there was a determination in her eyes that made Alex's breath catch. "Now I'm tired of being careful," she said. "I'm tired of making decisions based on fear instead of truth. I'm tired of settling for safe when what I really want is standing right in front of me." Alex felt like the air in the room had changed, become charged with possibility. Everything about this moment felt significant, like they were standing at the edge of something that would change both of their lives. "Zoe," he said, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish," she said. "I need to say this while I still have the courage." She took a deep breath. 2 years ago, when we first really started talking, I knew that you were different from anyone I'd ever met. You listened to me like my thoughts mattered. You remembered things I said weeks later. You made me laugh in ways that surprised me. Alex wanted to reach out and touch her, to close the small distance between them. But something told him to let her finish what she needed to say. "But I was scared," Zoe continued. "You were part of our friend group, and dating you would have complicated everything. Plus, I had just gotten out of a long relationship, and I convinced myself I needed to be single for a while. So I ignored how I felt and told myself we were just friends. Then Jake came along," Alex said quietly. "Then Jake came along," Zoe agreed. "And he was easy, safe, uncomplicated. Dating him didn't require me to risk anything or change anything about my life. It was like taking the path of least resistance. But tonight changed that," Alex said. Zoe nodded. "Tonight I realized that easy and safe aren't the same thing as right. And I realized that I've been lying to myself about what I really want." She looked directly at him. "I want complicated, Alex. I want something that matters enough to be worth the risk." The rain outside seemed to be getting louder, or maybe Alex was just more aware of it now that the moment felt so intense. His small apartment had never felt smaller, but in a good way. Like the whole world had shrunk down to just this room, just this conversation, just the two of them. "I've wanted to have this conversation for 2 years," Alex admitted. "I just never thought you felt the same way." "I did," Zoe said simply. "I do." She let the towel fall from her shoulders, and Alex could see that her shirt was still clinging to her from the rain. But more than that, he could see the vulnerability in her posture, the way she was offering her truth without any guarantee of how he'd respond. "So what do we do now?" Alex asked. It was the same question he'd asked before, but it felt different this time, more urgent. Zoe stepped closer, close enough that Alex could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Now we stop pretending," she said. "Now we stop being careful. Now we find out what happens when we're honest about what we want." Alex looked into her eyes and saw his own feelings reflected back at him. The attraction that had been simmering under the surface for years, the connection that had always felt deeper than friendship, the possibility of something real and meaningful and worth the risk. "I want that too," he said. "I want you. I've wanted you for so long that I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't real." Zoe smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out after a storm. "It's real," she said. "This is real." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Alex closed his eyes at the contact, amazed by how right it felt after years of wondering what her touch would be like. "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked. "Once we cross this line, we can't go back." "I don't want to go back," Zoe said. "I'm done going back. I'm done playing it safe. I'm done pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than extraordinary." Alex opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, taking in every detail of this moment that felt like it was changing everything. Outside, the storm continued, but inside, something perfect and terrifying and wonderful was beginning. The moment stretched between them like a bridge they were both afraid to cross. Alex could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the electricity in the air that comes right before lightning strikes. Zoe's hand was still on his face, her thumb gently tracing his cheekbone, and he found himself leaning into her touch without even thinking about it. "I can't believe you're here," Alex whispered. "I can't believe this is happening." Zoe's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind of tears that came with relief, with finally letting go of something you'd been holding on to for too long. "I can't believe it took me this long to be brave enough," she said. Alex reached up and covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. Her skin was warm and soft, and he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that he'd noticed 100 times before, but never been close enough to really appreciate. "What are you thinking?" Zoe asked softly. Alex was thinking a lot of things. He was thinking about how many nights he'd lain awake wondering what it would be like to touch her like this. He was thinking about all the conversations they'd had where he'd wanted to say more but held himself back. He was thinking about how scared he was of ruining this moment by saying or doing the wrong thing. "I'm thinking that I don't want to mess this up," Alex said honestly. "I'm thinking that you're the most beautiful person I've ever met, inside and out, and I can't quite believe you're standing in my apartment telling me you feel the same way I do." Zoe smiled, and it was like watching a flower bloom. "You're not going to mess this up," she said. "We're in this together now. Whatever happens, we figure it out together." The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm. No longer the angry downpour it had been earlier, but a gentler sound that made the apartment feel even more like a safe haven from the outside world. Alex's neighbors were probably asleep by now, which meant they were truly alone in this bubble they'd created. Zoe stepped even closer until there was barely any space left between them. Alex could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could see the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. She was still wearing her damp clothes, and he found himself wanting to take care of her, to make sure she was comfortable and warm. "You're still cold," Alex said, noticing the way she shivered slightly. "Let me get you something dry to wear." But Zoe shook her head. "I'm not cold anymore," she said. "Being close to you like this, I feel warmer than I have in months." Alex understood what she meant. There was something about finally acknowledging what had been between them that felt like coming in from the cold, like he'd been walking around an emotional winter for years and had suddenly found himself in spring. "Can I ask you something?" Zoe said. "Anything." "That night at Lisa's party when we talked on the porch for so long, did you feel it then? This thing between us?" Alex nodded immediately. "I felt it the first time I really talked to you," he said, "but especially that night. I remember thinking that I could talk to you forever and never get bored. I remember not wanting the party to end because it would mean our conversation would end. I went home that night and couldn't sleep," Zoe admitted. "I kept replaying everything we talked about, the way you looked at me when I was speaking, the way you laughed at my terrible jokes. I knew then that you were going to be important to me. I just didn't know how important." Alex felt his chest tighten with emotion. All this time, she'd been feeling the same things he was feeling. All those moments when he'd thought he was imagining the connection between them, she'd been experiencing it too. "I used to look forward to group gatherings just because I knew you'd be there," Alex said. "I'd plan conversation topics in my head, things I wanted to ask you about or share with you. I felt like a teenager with a crush." Zoe laughed softly. "I did the same thing. I'd think about what to wear, what you might want to talk about. I'd get nervous before seeing you, the good kind of nervous that makes your stomach flutter." They were standing so close now that Alex could count her eyelashes if he wanted to. Her face was tilted up toward his, and he could see the trust in her eyes, the way she was letting him see all of her without any masks or pretenses. "Zoe," Alex said, and her name felt different on his tongue now. Not like the careful, friendly way he'd said it for years, but like something precious he was finally allowed to claim. "Yes?" "I need you to know something," Alex said. "Whatever happens between us, whatever we become, you're already the most important person in my life. You have been for a long time, even when I couldn't admit it to myself." Zoe's eyes filled with tears again, and this time one escaped and rolled down her cheek. Alex caught it with his thumb, marveling at how soft her skin was. "You're important to me too," she whispered. "More important than I let myself realize. When I was sitting in my car tonight, trying to decide whether to come up here, I realized that you're the person I think about when I need to feel safe. You're the person whose opinion matters to me most. You're the person I want to share good news with and the person I want to comfort me when things go wrong." Alex felt like his heart might burst. How had they managed to hide this from each other for so long? How had they both been so careful, so afraid of ruining their friendship, that they'd almost missed out on something this beautiful? "I don't want to be careful anymore," Zoe said, echoing his thoughts. "I don't want to second-guess every word I say to you, or wonder if I'm being too obvious about how I feel. I want to be able to look at you the way I've always wanted to look at you." "How's that?" Alex asked. Zoe's eyes grew intense, and when she looked at him now, it was with an openness that made his breath catch. There was love there, and desire, and something that looked like wonder. But most of all, there was acceptance. Like she was finally allowing herself to see him as more than a friend, to want him as more than a friend. "Like you're mine," she said simply. "Like I have the right to care about you this much. Like I don't have to hide how much you mean to me." Alex felt something shift inside him, like a door opening that had been locked for years. The way Zoe was looking at him made him feel seen and wanted and valued in a way he'd never experienced before. It wasn't just attraction, though. That was certainly there. It was recognition, like she was seeing all of him, the good parts and the flawed parts and everything in between, and choosing him anyway. "You do have that right," Alex said. "You've always had that right. I just didn't know you wanted it." Zoe reached up with her other hand, so she was now holding his face between both palms. "I want it," she said. "I want you. I want this. I want to stop pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than love." The word hung in the air between them, honest and brave and terrifying. Alex had never heard anything more beautiful in his life. "I love you too," he said, and saying it felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. "I think I've loved you since that first real conversation we had. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." Zoe smiled through her tears, and Alex thought that this might be the most perfect moment of his entire life. Standing in his small, imperfect apartment, holding the woman he loved while rain fell outside and the rest of the world disappeared. It was better than any fantasy he'd ever had because it was real, and it was theirs, and it was finally happening. The first thing Alex noticed when he woke up was the sunlight streaming through his bedroom curtains. He'd forgotten to close them the night before, too caught up in everything that had happened to think about practical things like blocking out the morning light. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't alone. Zoe was curled up next to him, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one arm tucked under her cheek. She looked peaceful in a way he'd never seen before, like all the tension she usually carried had melted away while she slept. Alex lay very still, not wanting to wake her, just taking in the reality of her presence in his bed, in his life, in this new version of their story. Everything felt different in the morning light. Not bad different, just significant. Like the world had shifted slightly on its axis overnight, and he was still getting used to the new perspective. He thought about all the mornings he'd woken up alone in this apartment, wondering what his life was missing. Now he knew. Zoe stirred slightly, making a small sound as she moved closer to him in her sleep. Alex found himself smiling without meaning, too. Even unconscious, she seemed to seek his warmth, his presence. It was the most natural thing in the world, and yet it felt like a miracle. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the city waking up, car doors slamming, footsteps on the sidewalk, the distant hum of morning traffic. But inside his apartment, everything was quiet and peaceful. They'd created their own little world last night, and the morning hadn't broken the spell. Alex carefully reached for his phone on the nightstand, trying not to disturb Zoe. It was already past 9, later than he usually slept. He had 3 missed calls from his boss and several text messages, but for once in his life, work felt completely unimportant. Whatever crisis was waiting for him at the office could wait a little longer. Zoe's eyes fluttered open just as Alex was setting his phone back down. For a moment she looked confused, like she couldn't quite remember where she was. Then her gaze found his, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," Alex replied. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Zoe said, stretching like a cat. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to sleep next to someone I actually wanted to be close to." Alex felt a warm glow spread through his chest. Even in the light of day, with no rain or dramatic confessions to heighten the moment, what they'd found together still felt real and right. "Any regrets?" Alex asked, though he was pretty sure he knew the answer from the way she was looking at him. "Only that we waited so long," Zoe said, echoing his words from the night before. She propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him. "What about you? Having second thoughts in the harsh light of morning?" Alex reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The only thing I'm thinking is that I want to make you breakfast and coffee and figure out how to convince you to spend the whole day here with me." Zoe's smile got brighter. "That's a pretty tempting offer. But I should probably go home at some point and change clothes. Face the real world, you know." Alex nodded, though the thought of her leaving even temporarily made his stomach drop a little. "The real world," he said. "Right. I guess we should probably talk about that." Zoe's expression grew more serious. "You mean Jake and our friends, and the fact that everyone's going to have opinions about this. Are you worried about what people will say?" Alex asked. Zoe was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "A little," she admitted. "Some of our friends are going to be surprised. Lisa's probably going to claim she saw this coming all along. Jake's going to be hurt and angry, and I feel terrible about that." Alex understood. Even though Jake hadn't been right for Zoe, he was still a person with feelings, and no one wanted to be the cause of someone else's pain. "But you know what I realized last night?" Zoe continued. "I've spent so much time worrying about what other people think, about keeping everyone else comfortable, that I forgot to consider what would make me happy. And this, being here with you, being honest about how I feel, this makes me happier than I've been in years." Alex sat up, leaning against the headboard. "So what do we do? How do we handle all the complicated stuff?" Zoe sat up too, pulling the blanket around herself. "We take it one step at a time," she said. "I need to have a proper conversation with Jake, explain things as gently as I can. I owe him that much. And we need to figure out how to tell our friends without it turning into a huge drama." "Are you ready for all that?" Alex asked. "The conversations, the explanations, the potential awkwardness at group gatherings?" Zoe looked at him with those honest eyes that had captivated him from the beginning. "I'm ready for anything as long as I don't have to go through it alone. Are you ready to be in this with me? Really in this? Even when it gets complicated?" Alex didn't hesitate. "I've been ready for 2 years," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Zoe leaned over and kissed him softly, and Alex marveled at how natural it felt, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "I should probably call in sick today," Alex said when they broke apart. "Spend the day figuring out our new normal." "Our new normal," Zoe repeated like she was testing the words. I like the sound of that. They ended up staying in bed for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. They made plans for the day. Zoe would go home to change and have the difficult conversation with Jake, while Alex would handle some work emergencies remotely. Then they'd meet up for dinner and start figuring out how to build a life together. It wasn't going to be easy. They both knew that. There would be awkward conversations and hurt feelings and friends who took sides. There would be moments when they questioned whether they'd made the right choice, whether the risk had been worth it. But as Alex watched Zoe get dressed, borrowing one of his shirts because her clothes from the night before were still damp, he knew they were doing the right thing. Some connections were too rare and too precious to ignore just because they were inconvenient. "I'll see you tonight?" Zoe asked, standing in his doorway, fully dressed but somehow looking like she belonged in his space. "You'll see me tonight," Alex confirmed. And tomorrow, and every day after that, if you'll have me. Zoe's smile was radiant. I'll have you, she said. I choose you, Alex. I choose this. I choose us. After she left, Alex sat in his quiet apartment, still smelling her perfume on his pillow, still feeling the warmth of her presence in his space. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday. The same furniture, the same books, the same view from his windows. But everything felt completely different. For the first time in months, maybe years, Alex felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly the right person, making exactly the right choice. It was terrifying and wonderful and perfect all at once. He picked up his phone to call his boss to explain why he wouldn't be coming in today, but first he sent a text to Zoe. Thank you for being brave enough to knock on my door last night. Thank you for changing everything. Her response came back almost immediately. Thank you for opening it. Thank you for letting me in. Alex smiled, set his phone aside, and started thinking about what he wanted to cook for dinner. It was time to start building their new life together. One meal, one conversation, one brave choice at a time.